The phone call arrived on a Tuesday afternoon while I was covered in sawdust and arguing with a piece of oak that refused to cooperate. That's the thing about woodworking. Wood doesn't care about your schedule, or your problems, or the fact that your daughter is supposed to be picked up from school in 20 minutes. My name is Ethan Parker. I'm 43 years old. I own a small woodworking shop in Seabrook. Everything seemed normal for approximately 45 seconds. Then the employee looked at her computer screen. Her smile disappeared. My stomach immediately tightened. Then she looked at the screen again, then at us, then back at the screen. Never a good sign. Is everything okay? I asked. The woman swallowed. 1 moment, sir. Wonderful. Just wonderful. 10 minutes later, 3 managers had joined the conversation. My pulse accelerated with each new arrival, and suddenly our 7 days together were running out much faster than either of us wanted. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The kayaks drifted quietly across the water while Victoria stared at her phone. The piece we'd found inside the hidden cove seemed to vanish instantly. Finally, I broke the silence. How soon? Victoria laughed once. It wasn't a happy laugh. Tomorrow. My stomach dropped. Tomorrow? She nodded slowly. Emergency board meeting. Another pause. Apparently, the company can't survive without me for another week. The sarcasm couldn't hide the disappointment in her voice. Then she looked out toward the ocean again. Funny thing is, another pause. A week ago I would have been flattered. Silence followed. Then she smiled sadly. Now I'm just tired. The ride back to the resort felt completely different. The same ocean, the same sky, the same island. Yet somehow everything had changed, because now there was an ending approaching, and endings have a way of making every moment feel more important. When we returned, Sophie immediately knew something was wrong. Children always do. Victoria hadn't even stepped onto the dock before Sophie narrowed her eyes suspiciously. What happened? Neither of us answered fast enough. Big mistake. Uh-oh, Sophie said. That's the face. My pulse tightened. What face? The bad news face. Victoria sighed softly. I have to leave tomorrow. Silence. Complete silence. The words seemed to hang in the air. Sophie blinked once, then twice, then 3 times. Why? Victoria crouched beside her. Work. Another pause. Important work. Sophie looked unconvinced. More important than vacation? Victoria smiled sadly. Unfortunately, for the first time all week, Sophie didn't argue, didn't joke, didn't tease. She simply nodded and looked down. Somehow that felt worse, much worse. That evening, the villa felt quieter than usual. Dinner conversation came and went in strange waves. Sometimes everyone laughed, sometimes nobody spoke at all. Then, after Sophie went upstairs, Victoria and I found ourselves sitting on the patio overlooking the ocean. The night air felt warm. The waves rolled gently against the shore. Somewhere in the distance, music drifted from another section of the resort. Then Victoria exhaled slowly. I don't want to go. The honesty caught me completely off guard. Then again, lately everything about her seemed honest. I looked out toward the dark water. Then don't. The words escaped before I could stop them. Silence followed immediately. Victoria turned toward me. You know I have to. I did. Of course I did. Yet part of me wished I didn't. Then she smiled softly. Do you know what's dangerous about this island? My pulse tightened. What? It makes people imagine things. Another pause. Different lives. Another pause. Different futures. The ocean breeze moved through her hair. Then she looked toward the villa where Sophie was sleeping. For a few days, her voice softened. I forgot what my real life looked like. My chest tightened painfully. Then I asked quietly, and what does your real life look like? Victoria laughed softly. A sad sound. Meetings. Another pause. Investors. Another pause. Airports. Another pause. Hotels. Then she looked directly at me. Empty penthouses. Silence swallowed the patio. Because somehow that final answer explained everything. Then she smiled. Small, vulnerable, not nearly as glamorous as people think. Neither of us spoke for a while. The silence felt comfortable, familiar, dangerous. Then Victoria suddenly laughed. Can I confess something embarrassing? Sure. The first night we met, Another pause. I called my assistant. I smiled immediately. Why? Victoria covered her face. To complain about you. I burst out laughing. Seriously? Very seriously. Another pause. I told her some random single father had invaded my vacation. Invaded? She pointed at me. You showed up unexpectedly. The villa was my prize. Technical details. I laughed harder. Then Victoria smiled. You know what she said? What? Another pause. Then Victoria shook her head. She said I sounded happy. The words lingered between us. Then neither of us laughed anymore. Because suddenly the conversation wasn't funny, it was true. The next morning arrived far too quickly. Victoria's flight was scheduled for noon. Her suitcase sat near the front door. Her laptop rested on the kitchen counter. Reality had officially returned. Around 10 o'clock, Sophie disappeared, which immediately concerned both of us. 30 minutes later, she reappeared carrying a sealed envelope. What's that? I asked. Sophie smiled mysteriously. Private. I hated that answer. Sophie's excitement slowly transformed into suspicion. Finally, a man in a navy suit stepped forward. Mr. Parker. His smile looked painful. We've encountered a small issue. There it was. The phrase, every traveler fears. What kind of issue? Silence followed. Then he answered, Your villa has been double booked. My brain stopped. What? A reservation error. Another pause. A very unfortunate reservation error. Sophie looked horrified. Do we lose the vacation? Then she walked directly toward Victoria and handed it over. Don't open it until you're gone. Victoria accepted the envelope carefully. Okay. Another pause. What's inside? Sophie grinned. Classified information. Of course it was. By 11:30, the SUV arrived. The driver loaded Victoria's luggage. The engine started. Everything felt too fast, too sudden, too final. Then Sophie hugged Victoria so tightly I thought neither of them would ever let go. Call me, Sophie demanded. Every day. Victoria laughed through suspiciously bright eyes. Every day. Promise? Promise. Finally they pulled apart. Then Victoria turned toward me. The world seemed strangely quiet. Neither of us moved. Neither of us knew what to say, because some goodbyes become complicated when feelings get involved. Then Victoria smiled. Small, nervous, beautiful. Well. Another pause. Then she whispered, Thank you. My pulse tightened. For what? She looked around the villa. The beach. The ocean. The life we'd accidentally shared. Then her eyes found mine again. For the best week of my life. The words hit harder than anything else she'd said. Then, before I could answer, the driver cleared his throat politely. Time had run out. Victoria nodded once, then stepped toward the SUV. The door opened. She climbed inside, and just like that, she was leaving. The vehicle slowly pulled away from the villa. Sophie waved until it disappeared around the bend. Then she stopped. Silence followed. Complete silence. Finally, she looked up at me. She's coming back. My pulse tightened. You think? Sophie nodded confidently. I know. Another pause. Because I put something important in the envelope, my stomach dropped immediately. Sophie. She smiled. What? Then she ran inside before I could ask another question, leaving me standing alone beside the ocean, watching the road where Victoria had disappeared. Not knowing that 20 minutes later, somewhere on the way to the airport, she would finally open Sophie's envelope. And the letter inside would change everything. And the letter inside would change everything. Victoria didn't open Sophie's envelope immediately. At first, she simply held it in her lap while the SUV wound its way along the coastal road toward the airport. The ocean sparkled outside the window. Palm trees blurred past. Yet for the first time since arriving on the island, Victoria wasn't paying attention to the view. She was staring at the envelope, thinking, remembering, missing people she'd only met a week ago. Finally, halfway to the airport, curiosity won. She carefully broke the seal and unfolded the paper inside. The letter consisted of one page, written entirely in Sophie's messy handwriting. Dear Victoria, I know grown-ups are weird about feelings, so I'm writing this down. Thank you for making Dad laugh again. He doesn't do that enough. Also, thank you for making pancakes even though they were kind of bad. Another paragraph followed. Victoria smiled through sudden tears. Then she kept reading. Before this vacation, Dad mostly worked. He smiled sometimes, but not a lot. Then you showed up, and everything got brighter. Even he noticed. Another pause. Another breath. Then the final lines. I know you have important work, but if nobody is waiting for you there and we're waiting for you here, maybe you're going to the wrong home. Love, Sophie. Silence filled the SUV. Complete silence. Victoria stared at the page. Then read it again. Then a third time. By the time they reached the airport, she was crying. Not dramatically. Quietly. The way people cry when they finally hear something they've been avoiding. Unfortunately, reality didn't care about emotional breakthroughs. The moment Victoria landed in New York, her old life attacked. Reporters, cameras, meetings, phone calls, executives, investors. Within hours, she was back inside the glass tower headquarters of Knight Global. The building rose above Manhattan like a monument to ambition. A week earlier, it had represented everything she'd worked for. Now it felt strangely unfamiliar. The board meeting began at 8 the next morning. 12 executives sat around a polished conference table worth more than most houses. Charts covered giant screens. Financial reports filled tablets. Victoria listened, spoke, solved problems, made decisions. Everyone seemed relieved to have her back. Yet something felt wrong. Around noon, her board chairman smiled. It's good to have you home. The manager immediately shook his head. Absolutely not. Relief flooded through me. Then he continued. However, my relief immediately vanished. However what? The manager took a deep breath, like a man preparing to deliver terrible news. Then he pointed toward the far side of the lobby. The other guest has already checked in. Silence followed. Complete silence. Then I turned. A woman stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean. Dark hair, elegant posture. The sentence hit harder than expected, because for the first time in years, Victoria wasn't sure this was home anymore. That evening, she returned to her penthouse overlooking Central Park. The apartment was enormous, elegant, perfect, completely silent. No Sophie, no ridiculous vacation reports, no Ethan making coffee, no laughter, just quiet. The loneliness hit immediately. Then her phone buzzed. A text message. Sophie. The child had somehow obtained her number weeks ago. Victoria was afraid to ask how. The message contained a photograph. Ethan stood in the workshop covered in sawdust. He clearly didn't know the picture had been taken. Caption. Dad accidentally glued his shirt to a table today. Victoria laughed so hard she nearly dropped her phone. Then another message arrived. Also, he misses you. Silence followed. Then Victoria smiled despite herself. The next few days became increasingly difficult. Every meeting reminded her of what she'd left behind. Every interview felt artificial. Every evening felt emptier. Then Friday arrived. One full week after leaving the island, Victoria sat alone in her office reviewing acquisition reports when Ava entered carrying a folder. You look miserable. Victoria didn't bother denying it. Ava sat down across from her. Okay. Another pause. Let's stop pretending. Victoria looked up. Pretending what? Ava pointed directly at her. That this is about work. Silence followed. Then Ava leaned back. You're in love with him. My pulse would have stopped if I'd been there. Victoria simply stared at her assistant, then laughed softly. That sounds ridiculous. Ava nodded. It does. Another pause. Unfortunately, it's also true. The room grew quiet. Then Victoria looked toward the city skyline outside her office window. Finally, she whispered, What if it's too late? Ava blinked. Too late? What if that week was just another pause? Vacation magic? Ava stared at her, then burst out laughing. Victoria, another pause. The man survived 7 days with you and voluntarily wants more. Even Victoria laughed at that. Then Ava smiled. Go see him. Silence followed. Then Victoria looked down at Sophie's letter. She still carried it everywhere. The paper was slightly folded now, worn from being read too often. Then her phone buzzed. Another text message. Sophie again. This one contained only 5 words. Have you figured it out? Victoria stared at the screen, then typed back. Figured what out? The reply arrived immediately. Where you belong. Silence swallowed the office, because somehow a 9-year-old child had managed to ask the exact question Victoria had spent years avoiding. Then something inside her finally clicked. The answer wasn't complicated. It wasn't hidden. It had been obvious for days, maybe weeks, maybe longer. Then Victoria stood up. Ava immediately noticed. What are you doing? Victoria smiled. A real smile. The first real smile she'd had since leaving St. Aurelia. Then she grabbed her purse, her coat, her phone. Something irresponsible. Ava laughed. Good. 24 hours later, Ethan Parker was working inside his shop on a quiet Saturday morning when a familiar black SUV appeared outside. At first, he thought he was imagining things. Then the vehicle stopped, the door opened, and Victoria Knight stepped out carrying a suitcase. My pulse would have exploded. Ethan's certainly did. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then Victoria smiled. Small, nervous, hopeful. Hi. Ethan stared at her. Hi. Another pause. Then he looked at the suitcase. Long trip? Victoria laughed softly. Maybe. Silence followed. Then she took a deep breath. I quit. Ethan blinked. Once. Twice. 3 times. You what? Victoria smiled wider now. Not completely. Another pause. Just enough. Then she looked around the small coastal town, the workshop, the quiet streets, the life she'd spent weeks missing. Finally, her eyes returned to Ethan. I think my vacation isn't over yet. And for the first time since she left the island, it felt like she was finally home. And for the first time since she left the island, it felt like she was finally home. For several seconds, neither of us moved. I simply stood in the doorway of my workshop staring at Victoria Knight and the suitcase sitting beside her. Then I looked at the suitcase again, then back at her. You quit? Victoria laughed softly. You keep focusing on that part, because that's a very large part. She couldn't argue with that. Then she stepped closer. I didn't completely quit. Simple white linen outfit that somehow looked more expensive than my truck. Several people nearby kept glancing in her direction. Some whispered, some stared. The woman looked completely unaware, or completely used to it. Then she turned slightly, and my stomach dropped straight through the floor, because I knew exactly who she was. Everyone did. Victoria Knight, CEO of Knight Global, Billionaire, magazine cover regular, business television superstar, one of the most powerful women in America. Another pause. I stepped down as CEO. My brain stopped working. Completely. You stepped down as CEO? Yes. Of Knight Global? Yes. Silence followed. Then I pointed toward the suitcase. And now you're here, Victoria smiled. Also, yes, somewhere behind us, a power saw stopped running. I turned around. 3 employees were openly staring. Wonderful, just wonderful. Then Victoria noticed too. Are they always this subtle? No. Another pause. Usually they're worse. That earned a laugh. A real one. The kind I'd missed more than I wanted to admit. Then a familiar voice exploded from across the street. Victoria. My soul immediately left my body. Sophie. Of course. The child appeared from absolutely nowhere and sprinted toward us at dangerous speed. Victoria barely had time to brace herself before Sophie launched into her arms. You came back. Victoria laughed and held her tightly. I did. Good. Another pause. You were taking forever. The CEO looked at me helplessly. She's impossible. I've been telling people that for years. Sophie pulled back slightly and narrowed her eyes. Wait. Her gaze shifted to the suitcase, then back to Victoria, then back to the suitcase. A dangerous smile appeared. That's a big suitcase. My stomach dropped immediately. Victoria noticed too. Oh no. Oh yes. Sophie pointed dramatically. You're staying. Silence. Complete silence. Then Victoria smiled. Maybe. Sophie gasped so loudly that 2 seagulls flew away. By lunchtime, the entire town somehow knew Victoria had returned. Nobody understood how. Nobody questioned it. Mrs. Henderson delivered pie. The diner owner offered free lunch. Someone sent flowers. Someone else sent cookies. Willow Creek apparently operated faster than social media. Around 3 o'clock, Victoria sat on the porch of my house holding a cup of coffee while watching Sophie ride her bicycle up and down the street. The afternoon sun painted everything gold. The town looked peaceful, small, simple. Then Victoria smiled. "This place is dangerous." I sat beside her. "Again with dangerous?" She nodded. "Every time I come here, I want to stay longer." The honesty made my chest tighten. Then she looked toward the ocean in the distance. "Do you know what happened after I got back to New York?" My pulse tightened slightly. "What?" Victoria laughed softly. "Nothing." Another pause. "That's what scared me." I looked at her. She continued. "The meetings happened." Another pause. "The reports happened." Another pause. "The interviews happened." Then she looked down at her coffee, but I didn't care. Silence followed. Then she smiled sadly. For the first time in my life, success felt smaller than something else. My heart forgot how to function, because I knew exactly what she meant. The next few weeks passed faster than anyone expected. Victoria rented a small beachfront cottage near town. Officially temporary. Nobody believed that, especially Sophie. Every morning Victoria worked remotely. Every afternoon she somehow ended up with us. Sometimes at the workshop, sometimes at the beach, sometimes helping Sophie with homework, which mostly involved losing arguments to a 9-year-old. Then one evening everything changed. We were walking along the shoreline at sunset. Sophie had run ahead collecting shells. The sky glowed orange and pink across the water. The moment felt too perfect, too quiet, too dangerous. Then Victoria suddenly stopped walking. My pulse immediately accelerated. "Everything okay?" She nodded slowly, then took a breath, then another. Finally she looked directly at me. I've been trying to figure out the right way to say this. My heart stopped, completely stopped. The ocean rolled softly behind us. The wind moved through her hair. Then she smiled nervously. It was the first time I'd ever seen Victoria Knight nervous. "And?" I asked. Her laugh was small, vulnerable, real, and it turns out there isn't one. Silence followed. Then she stepped closer. "So I'm just going to say it." My pulse hammered so hard I could hear it. Then Victoria looked directly into my eyes. "I missed you." The words hit harder than anything else she could have said. Not because they were dramatic, because they were honest. Then she continued. "I missed Sophie." Another pause. "I missed the town." Another pause. "I missed this. The beach. The sunset. Us." My chest tightened painfully. Then Victoria smiled through slightly watery eyes. "I spent years chasing a life I thought I wanted." Another pause. "Then I accidentally got stuck, sharing a villa with a stubborn single father." I laughed immediately. She laughed too. Then neither of us spoke for several seconds, because some moments don't need extra words. Finally I stepped closer. "You know what's funny?" Victoria shook her head. "What?" I smiled. "That wasn't a vacation." Her eyes softened. Sophie looked at me, then at her, then back at me. Her eyes widened to dangerous levels. "Dad." "Yeah?" Silence. Complete silence. Then my daughter whispered the words that would change the entire vacation. "I think we accidentally got stuck with a CEO." "No. No." Another pause. "That was the best thing that ever happened to me." Silence swallowed the shoreline. Then Victoria's eyes filled instantly. Real tears. Happy tears. The kind people spend years searching for. Then she whispered, "Good." Another pause. "Because it was the best thing that ever happened to me too. And for the first time since that ridiculous contest changed our lives, neither of us was afraid to admit it. And for the first time since that ridiculous contest changed our lives, neither of us was afraid to admit it." The problem was that life rarely allows people to enjoy happiness without interruption. Ours arrived 3 days later. It started with a phone call. I was in the workshop helping a customer choose wood finishes when Victoria's name appeared on my screen. The moment I answered, I knew something was wrong. Her voice sounded tense, not scared, not upset, focused, which somehow worried me more. "Hey, hey." Silence followed. Then she sighed. "I need a favor." My stomach tightened immediately. Okay, another pause. Can you come to my cottage? The request alone told me something serious had happened. Victoria never asked for help unless she truly needed it. I'm on my way. 20 minutes later, I arrived at the beach cottage. The moment I stepped inside, I found Victoria sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by documents, financial reports, legal files, contracts, hundreds of pages. My pulse immediately accelerated. What's going on? Victoria rubbed her forehead. The exhaustion on her face was impossible to miss. Then she pushed one document toward me. Night Global. I sat down. What about it? Silence followed. Then she answered. The board wants me back. My stomach dropped. Completely dropped. Back? Victoria nodded slowly. Full-time. Another pause. Immediately. The cottage suddenly felt smaller. Too small. Then she laughed softly. Humorless. Apparently my replacement lasted 3 weeks. That wasn't encouraging. Then she leaned back in her chair. Stock prices are dropping. Another pause. Investors are nervous. Another pause. Everyone thinks I can fix it. Silence followed. Then I asked quietly, "Can you?" Victoria smiled sadly. Probably. The answer hurt more than it should have, because I knew what came next. New York. Meetings. Flights. Distance. Reality. Then she looked down at the papers. That's the problem. Another pause. I don't want to. The honesty hit me hard. Then neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally, Victoria whispered, "For the first time in my life, I know exactly where I want to be." My chest tightened painfully. Then she laughed softly. And unfortunately, it's not Manhattan. Before I could answer, the front door exploded open. Sophie, of course. The child entered carrying a backpack, a notebook, and the energy of a small tornado. Then she stopped. One look at Victoria's face and the smile vanished. Immediately. What's wrong? Neither of us answered. Sophie crossed her arms. Don't do that. Do what? I asked. The adult thing. Another pause. Where you pretend everything's fine while obviously being miserable. The terrifying thing was that she wasn't wrong. Then Victoria smiled gently. My company needs me. Sophie's eyes narrowed instantly. Again? Victoria laughed despite herself. Again. Silence followed. Then Sophie walked to the table and stared at the documents. Then at Victoria. Then at me. Finally, she asked the question neither of us wanted to answer. Are you leaving? The room became completely silent. Victoria looked down. That was answer enough. Sophie's shoulders dropped slightly. The sight hurt more than I expected. Then she nodded slowly. Once. Twice. Like she was processing something difficult. Then she surprised all of us. Okay. Victoria blinked. Okay? Sophie nodded. Yeah. Another pause. But can I ask one question? Victoria smiled softly. Always. Sophie thought carefully. Then asked, when does someone get enough? Silence. Complete silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Sophie continued. You have money. Another pause. You have a company. Another pause. You have success. Then she looked directly at Victoria. How do you know when it's enough? The question landed like a thunderbolt, because suddenly, nobody was talking about business anymore. The room remained silent for nearly 20 seconds. Then Victoria looked away, toward the ocean outside the window, toward the life she'd spent years chasing. Finally she whispered, I don't know. Sophie nodded, then smiled sadly. I think you do. And with that, she grabbed an apple from the counter and walked out of the room, leaving two adults completely speechless. I think we accidentally got stuck with a CEO. The statement should have been ridiculous. Unfortunately, it was completely accurate. For several seconds, Sophie and I simply stared across the lobby. Victoria Knight stood near the windows speaking quietly into her phone. Everything about her looked effortless. The confidence, the posture, the calm expression. She looked like someone who belonged in places like Azure Cove. People like me won contests to visit places like this. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. Victoria reviewed reports, answered calls, solved problems. Yet her attention kept drifting, toward the beach, toward Willow Creek, toward the life waiting just outside the cottage walls. Then that evening, everything changed. Ava called. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. I couldn't hear most of it, only fragments. Then Victoria stood up abruptly. Are you serious? Silence. Another pause. Then, they approved it? My pulse immediately accelerated. When the call finally ended, Victoria stared at her phone for several seconds, then looked at me. Her expression was unreadable. What happened? I asked. For a moment she didn't answer. Then slowly, very slowly, a smile appeared. The kind of smile people get when they realize they've been looking at a locked door and suddenly discover it was never locked at all. Then Victoria laughed. A real laugh. Bright. Free. Relieved. Apparently, she said, there's another option. My heart immediately started hammering. What kind of option? Victoria looked toward the ocean, toward the town, toward the future, then back at me, her eyes shining brighter than I'd ever seen before, the kind that changes everything. And for the first time since the board demanded her return, Victoria Knight finally looked hopeful again. And for the first time since the board demanded her return, Victoria Knight finally looked hopeful again. For several seconds, I simply stared at her. The smile on her face was unlike anything I'd seen before. Not the confident smile she used in interviews, not the polite smile she gave strangers. This one was different, lighter, happier, real. Then I sat forward. What kind of option? Victoria laughed softly and dropped into the chair across from me. The board approved a restructuring plan. My pulse tightened. Meaning? She smiled wider. Meaning I don't have to go back. Silence. Complete silence. Then I blinked. Once. Twice. 3 times. What? Victoria laughed. That was my reaction too. Then she explained. For years, Knight Global had been built around one person. Her. Every major decision, every major meeting, every crisis, every negotiation. The board had always assumed the company needed Victoria physically present in New York. But after weeks of discussions, something unexpected happened. Several senior executives proposed a new structure, a distributed leadership model, new regional CEOs, more delegation, less dependence on a single person. Victoria shook her head in disbelief. Apparently, the company can survive without me sitting in Manhattan 24 hours a day. I smiled. Amazing. Revolutionary. Another pause. Terrifying for control freaks. The relief in her voice was impossible to miss. Then she looked toward the ocean outside the window. I can stay. The words settled between us. Simple. Powerful. Life-changing. Then Sophie burst through the door. Naturally. What happened? Victoria looked at me. Then at Sophie. Then smiled. I'm staying. Silence. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. Then Sophie screamed. Not yelled, not shouted, screamed. The kind of scream usually associated with winning the lottery or discovering unlimited ice cream. Then she launched herself at Victoria so hard both of them nearly fell off the chair. You're staying? Victoria laughed. I'm staying. For how long? Another pause. Then Victoria smiled. As long as you'll have me. That was it. Sophie started crying immediately, which meant Victoria started crying, which meant I was suddenly very interested in a spot on the wall behind them. The next few months felt like a dream. Victoria sold her penthouse in New York. She bought a beautiful home overlooking the water just outside Willow Creek. Officially, it was a vacation property. Nobody believed that. Especially not Sophie. Knight Global opened a regional office 2 hours away, giving Victoria a legitimate reason to stay local. She still traveled, still worked, still ran one of the most successful companies in America, but now she came home afterward. Real home. Not a hotel, not a penthouse. Home. Then one evening, almost a year after we first met on that island, I found myself standing on the same beach where Sophie and I watched sunsets every summer. The ocean rolled quietly against the shore. The sky glowed orange and gold. Victoria stood beside me watching Sophie collect shells near the waterline. Then she smiled. You know. What? She slipped her hand into mine. Effortlessly. Naturally, like she'd been doing it forever. People like her probably owned places like this. Then the manager cleared his throat nervously. Mr. Parker? My attention snapped back. Yeah? The man smiled the way people smile when they're about to ask for something unreasonable. We have a proposal. I immediately hated the word proposal. What kind of proposal? Silence followed. Then he pointed toward a digital map of the resort. The villa has 2 master suites. My pulse tightened instantly. No. Mr. Parker, no. I almost didn't take that vacation. My pulse tightened slightly. Really? She nodded. The board practically forced me. Another pause. I complained the entire flight. I laughed. Sounds about right. Victoria laughed too. Then her expression softened. Can you imagine? Another pause. 1 booking error. Another pause. 1 storm. Another pause. 1 impossible little girl. We both looked toward Sophie at exactly the same time. She was currently trying to convince a crab to become her friend. Then Victoria smiled. And everything changed. Silence settled around us. Comfortable silence. The kind that comes when life finally feels right. Then I reached into my pocket. My heart immediately started hammering. Victoria noticed. What are you doing? I laughed nervously. Something irresponsible. Her eyes widened instantly. Ethan. Too late. I was already kneeling in the sand. The world seemed to stop. The waves. The wind. Everything. Then Sophie looked up from the shoreline and froze. Completely froze. Oh my God. The child started sprinting toward us at full speed. Victoria covered her face with both hands, already crying. Then I smiled. You once told me the best things in life happen by accident. Tears rolled down her cheeks immediately. Then I opened the small box. I think you're right. Silence followed. Beautiful silence. Then I asked the easiest question I'd ever asked in my life. Will you marry me? Victoria started laughing and crying at the same time. Then she nodded. Once. Twice. Again and again. Yes. Another tearful laugh. Obviously yes. Sophie reached us at that exact moment and practically tackled both of us into the sand. I knew it. Nearby seagulls flew away in panic. We laughed so hard it hurt. 1 year later, the wedding took place on the same beach. The entire town attended. Mrs. Henderson cried before the ceremony even started. The diner owner cried during the ceremony. Half the guests cried during the vows. Sophie cried through almost all of it despite repeatedly insisting she wasn't crying. Then, after the ceremony, she handed Victoria a framed document. Official vacation report. Victoria immediately started laughing. So did I. The final page contained only 1 entry. Candidate name, Victoria Knight. Vacation outcome, success. Future mom potential, confirmed. Status, keep forever. Signed, Sophie Parker. Years later, reporters still asked Victoria Knight the same question. How did one of the most powerful CEOs in America find happiness? She always gave the same answer. Not in a boardroom, not in a skyscraper, not through success, through a vacation she couldn't control, a storm she didn't want, a little girl who refused to mind her own business, and a single father who accidentally became home. Because sometimes the best things in life aren't planned. Sometimes they arrive through mistakes, through detours, through wrong turns. And, sometimes, all it takes to change your life forever is getting stuck with the right person. The end. The manager sighed. Please, let me finish. That was never a good sign. Then he explained. Apparently, the villa had originally been designed for corporate retreats. 2 separate wings, 2 separate entrances, shared common areas, complete privacy if desired, which sounded suspiciously like a sales pitch. Then he delivered the part I hated most. Unfortunately, every other villa on the island is fully booked. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Sophie raised her hand. Question. The manager looked relieved. Yes? If we share the villa, do we still get the private pool? The child had priorities. Then the manager smiled. Yes. Sophie immediately turned toward me. I'm listening. I was not. Then another voice entered the conversation. Calm, elegant, unmistakably amused. I'm not. Every person in the lobby froze. Slowly, I turned around. Victoria Knight stood behind us. Somehow she'd crossed the room without any of us noticing. That felt concerning. Then she looked directly at the manager. Find them another villa. The manager looked like he wanted to disappear. Miss Knight, another villa. Silence followed. Then the manager swallowed. There isn't one. Victoria stared at him, the kind of stare that probably made executives resign. You're telling me the most expensive resort in the Caribbean has no available rooms? At the moment. Another pause. Correct. The CEO closed her eyes briefly. A coastal town where everyone knows each other's business and most of them pretend not to. 5 years ago, my wife Claire died in a car accident. Since then, life has been simple, not easy, just simple. Work, bills, school pickups, homework, bedtime stories. Repeat. My daughter Sophie says I live like a 70-year-old man trapped inside a 43-year-old body. She's probably right. Around 3 o'clock, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Hello? Mister? Like someone counting to 10 internally. Then she looked at me. For the first time. Up close. Her gray-blue eyes were surprisingly warm, which somehow made her more intimidating. Then she smiled politely. I'm sorry about this. My pulse immediately did something stupid. Not your fault. Another pause. I think. Sophie stepped forward before either of us could continue. Naturally. Hi. Victoria blinked, then smiled. A real smile this time. Hi. I'm Sophie. Victoria. Another pause. Then my daughter pointed at the ocean. That's a nice view. Victoria looked toward the water. It is. You should share it. Silence exploded across the lobby. I closed my eyes. The child was trying to get us killed. Then Victoria laughed unexpectedly. Not politely, not professionally, actually laughed. That's a very direct approach. Sophie nodded. It saves time. The terrifying thing was that Victoria seemed impressed. Then the manager saw an opening and immediately attacked. Perhaps we could arrange a temporary solution. My stomach dropped. Then Victoria sighed dramatically. How temporary? The manager smiled. 1 week. The CEO stared at him. The manager stared back. I considered swimming home. Finally, Victoria looked at me. Do you snore? My brain stopped working. What? Important question. Another pause. Do you? Sophie answered before I could. Like a chainsaw. Traitor. Absolute traitor. Then Victoria laughed again. The sound surprised me. Most people on television never laughed naturally. Everything about her public image seemed controlled, polished. This didn't. Then she sighed. Fine. My pulse immediately accelerated. Fine? She pointed toward the manager. You win. Then toward me. You stay. Then toward Sophie. And if your father snores, I'm sending you both to another island. Sophie pumped her fist in victory. The manager looked like he'd survived a near-death experience. Meanwhile, I stared at the ceiling wondering how my vacation had turned into a hostage negotiation. 30 minutes later, a golf cart transported us toward the villa. The resort stretched across a private section of coastline. Palm trees lined stone pathways. Water sparkled in every direction. Sophie spent the entire ride turning around trying to spot Victoria's vehicle behind us. Stop that. What? You're staring. I'm observing. The child was impossible. Then the villa appeared, and for a moment, even I forgot about the problem. It was stunning. White stone walls, massive glass windows, ocean views from every angle, a private infinity pool overlooking the beach. The place looked larger than some neighborhoods. Sophie stepped out of the cart and froze. Dad. Yeah? If we break anything, we'll owe money forever. Fair assessment. Then the front door opened. A staff member escorted us inside. The villa was exactly as described. 2 separate wings, shared kitchen, shared living room, shared patio, shared pool, shared everything important. My pulse immediately tightened. Then another voice drifted from the far side of the house. Well, silence followed. This is awkward. I turned. Victoria stood near the kitchen, holding a coffee mug. She looked less intimidating without the corporate armor. Barefoot, casual clothes, hair tied back, human. Then she raised her mug slightly. Welcome to paradise. Sophie grinned immediately. Thanks. Another pause. Do billionaires always live like this? I nearly died. Victoria, however, seemed amused. No. She glanced around the villa. Usually there are more meetings. That earned another laugh from Sophie. Not from me. Then Victoria looked directly at me. Let's establish a few ground rules. My pulse accelerated. Okay, she nodded. You enjoy your vacation. Another pause. I'll enjoy mine. Another pause. And we avoid each other whenever possible. Silence followed. Then I smiled. Small. Polite. Works for me. The strange thing was that both of us were lying. We just didn't know it yet, because less than 2 hours later, a tropical storm warning would force the entire resort into emergency preparation mode, and the woman who wanted privacy was about to get stuck with us much more than either of us expected. And the woman who wanted privacy was about to get stuck with us much more than either of us expected. The storm warning arrived at exactly 4:17 p.m. A loud notification echoed across every phone in the resort. Then another, then another. Within minutes, staff members were moving quickly across the property. Lounge chairs disappeared, umbrellas folded, beach access closed. The atmosphere changed instantly. Vacation mode vanished. Preparation mode arrived. Ethan Parker? A cheerful voice answered. Whenever strangers sound that cheerful, they're usually about to sell you something. Maybe. The woman laughed politely. Congratulations. That immediately sounded suspicious. For what? You won. Silence. Complete silence. Then I looked around the workshop. Nobody was filming. No hidden cameras. No practical jokes. Won what? The woman practically vibrated with excitement. The Coastal Hope Foundation vacation giveaway. Sophie watched the activity through the giant living room windows. That doesn't look good. It didn't. Dark clouds had appeared on the horizon. The ocean, which had looked calm and beautiful only an hour earlier, now seemed restless. Then the villa's television automatically switched to a local weather channel. A meteorologist appeared. Nobody likes meteorologists when they're smiling during storm reports. Tropical Storm Helena has changed direction. My stomach tightened immediately. The smiling meteorologist continued. Guests should expect severe weather conditions within the next 24 hours. Wonderful. Just wonderful. Then Victoria walked into the living room carrying her laptop. One glance at the television, and her expression darkened. How bad? She asked. The meteorologist answered for me. The island may experience transportation disruptions for several days. Silence followed. Then Sophie looked at Victoria. What does that mean? The CEO sighed softly. It means nobody's leaving anytime soon. My daughter looked suspiciously excited by this information. Around dinner time, the first rain arrived. Not heavy, just enough to darken the sky and push everyone indoors. The resort restaurant became crowded almost immediately, which was how I ended up sitting across from Victoria Knight at dinner. Not because I wanted to. Not because she wanted to, because every other table was taken. Sophie considered this the greatest thing that had ever happened. This is nice. It wasn't. Then Victoria looked at me. Your daughter is plotting something. I know. Sophie smiled innocently. The expression fooled absolutely nobody. Dinner started awkwardly, then became stranger, then somehow became enjoyable. Victoria turned out to be surprisingly funny, which felt unfair. Billionaires aren't supposed to be funny. They already have enough advantages. Then Sophie asked a question that nearly killed me. Why don't you have kids? Silence exploded across the table. My soul left my body immediately. Victoria blinked once, then twice. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. Sad, small, honest. Life got complicated. Sophie nodded thoughtfully, apparently satisfied with that answer. Then she pointed at me. His life got complicated too. I buried my face in my hands. Victoria laughed softly. I noticed. The rest of dinner passed without further emotional destruction. Mostly, then the rain became heavier. Much heavier. By the time we returned to the villa, the wind had started howling outside. Palm trees bent dramatically. Waves crashed against the shoreline. The storm was no longer approaching. It had arrived. Sophie stood near the window, staring at the ocean. This is kind of scary. Victoria appeared beside her. A little. Another pause. But the villa is safe. Sophie nodded, then looked up at her. Were you scared a lot when you were little? The question caught Victoria completely off guard. I could tell. Then she smiled softly. All the time. Sophie seemed surprised. Really? Really? Another pause. Adults pretend they're brave. She looked toward the storm outside. Most of the time we're just pretending. The answer lingered in the room. Then Sophie smiled. Dad does that too. Wonderful. My daughter had apparently dedicated this vacation to exposing me. Around 9 o'clock, the power flickered. Once, twice, then stabilized. The villa became very quiet. The sound of the storm filled every room. Rain hammered the windows. Wind rattled the glass. The ocean roared somewhere beyond the darkness. Then Sophie's eyes widened dramatically. Can we play a game? Victoria looked suspicious. What kind of game? My daughter grinned. That should have terrified us both. Questions? Of course. 10 minutes later, we sat around the coffee table while Sophie acted as host. The rules were simple. Everyone had to answer honestly. I immediately hated the game. First question, Sophie announced. She pointed toward Victoria. What's the coolest place you've ever been? Victoria thought for a moment. Antarctica. Silence. Complete silence. Then Sophie nearly fell off the couch. You went to Antarctica? The CEO smiled. Twice. The game continued. Favorite food. Favorite movie. Biggest fear. Best memory. Then Sophie asked me what my favorite vacation had ever been. I laughed immediately. This is my first real vacation. Victoria looked genuinely surprised. Seriously? I nodded. Seriously. Her expression changed slightly. Softer now. Thoughtful. Then Sophie asked the question that changed the mood completely. What's the saddest thing that ever happened to you? Silence swallowed the room. My stomach dropped instantly. The child looked between us, completely unaware of the emotional landmine she'd just thrown. Then Victoria looked at me. I looked at Victoria. Neither of us spoke. Finally, Sophie realized. My brain stopped working, because I vaguely remembered entering that contest 6 months ago. Sophie had forced me. The grand prize had been ridiculous. 7 days at an ultra-luxury Caribbean resort, private villa, ocean views, all expenses paid. The kind of vacation people with actual money took, not people who repaired dining tables for a living. You're kidding. I assure you, Mr. Parker, we're not. My pulse immediately accelerated. Then the woman continued. Oh. Her face fell. I'm sorry. Then something unexpected happened. Victoria reached over and squeezed Sophie's hand, gently. It's okay. Another pause. Then she looked at me. Sometimes sad things are part of the story. The room became very quiet. Then Sophie nodded slowly. Mom used to say that. My chest tightened painfully. The storm continued raging outside. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Finally, Victoria asked softly, what was she like? The question surprised me. Most people avoided talking about Claire. Not because they didn't care, because they were afraid. Then I smiled. Small. Genuine. She laughed at everything. Another pause. Even terrible jokes. Sophie nodded enthusiastically. Especially terrible jokes. Then for the next 20 minutes, we talked about Claire. Stories. Memories. Funny moments. Little things. The kind of details that keep people alive after they're gone. Victoria listened quietly the entire time, never interrupting, never changing the subject, just listening. And somehow, that meant more than I expected. Around midnight, Sophie finally fell asleep on the couch. The storm continued outside, the villa lights glowed softly, and for the first time all evening, Victoria and I were alone. Well, mostly alone. Sophie was snoring quietly nearby. Then Victoria looked toward the sleeping child and smiled. She's remarkable. Yeah. Silence followed. Comfortable silence. Unexpected silence. Then Victoria looked out toward the storm-dark ocean. You know something? My pulse tightened slightly. What? She smiled softly. This vacation is already nothing like I planned. Rain hammered the windows. Wind shook the palm trees. Somewhere outside, paradise had disappeared beneath the storm. Yet somehow, sitting in that warm living room with a sleeping child nearby, and a billionaire CEO sharing stories beside me. I wasn't sure that was a bad thing. Yet somehow, sitting in that warm living room with a sleeping child nearby and a billionaire CEO sharing stories beside me, I wasn't sure that was a bad thing. The storm continued through the night. Around 2 in the morning, a crash of thunder shook the villa hard enough to wake the dead. Unfortunately, it also woke Sophie. I found her standing in the hallway clutching a blanket and looking half terrified, half embarrassed. The moment she saw me, she tried to act brave. "I'm fine." Children always say that when they're absolutely not fine. Then another thunderclap exploded overhead. Sophie immediately grabbed my arm. "Okay." Another pause. Maybe a little scared. Before I could answer, another door opened. Victoria stepped into the hallway wearing an oversized resort sweatshirt and sweatpants. Her hair was loose for the first time. Somehow she looked younger, less like a CEO, more like a normal person who'd been dragged out of bed at 2 in the morning. Then she noticed Sophie. "Thunder?" Sophie nodded. Victoria smiled sympathetically. "Yeah." Another pause. "I hate thunder too." My daughter looked shocked. "Really? Really?" Then Victoria shrugged. "It's loud." Sophie considered this carefully, then asked the obvious question. "Shouldn't billionaires be brave?" The silence lasted exactly 1 second before Victoria burst out laughing. "Absolutely not." 10 minutes later, all 3 of us sat in the living room drinking hot chocolate while the storm rattled the windows. Not exactly the luxury Caribbean vacation I'd imagined. Yet somehow it felt perfect. Then Sophie fell asleep again, this time curled up beside Victoria on the couch. I expected the CEO to move. She didn't. Instead, she carefully adjusted the blanket over Sophie's shoulders. The gesture was so natural it caught me completely off guard. Then Victoria looked up and caught me staring. "What?" My pulse immediately accelerated. "Nothing. That's a lie." The annoying thing was that she sounded exactly like Sophie. Then I smiled slightly. "You're good with her." Something changed in Victoria's expression. Just for a moment. A flicker of sadness. Then she looked down at the sleeping child beside her. "She's easy to love." The words landed harder than she intended. Because suddenly I understood something. Victoria wasn't looking at Sophie like a stranger. She was looking at her like someone imagining what might have been. Then the lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then disappeared completely. Darkness swallowed the villa. Sophie slept through it. Somehow. The rest of us weren't so lucky. "Well," Victoria said, "that's not ideal." The emergency lights kicked in a few seconds later, casting a soft golden glow through the room. Outside, the storm looked even more dramatic now. The ocean had vanished into darkness. You and 1 guest will enjoy a 7-day luxury stay at Azure Cove Resort in St. Aurelia. I sat down before gravity did it for me. "I won?" "You won." Silence followed. Then I smiled. Really smiled. For the first time in weeks. Maybe months. Then I thought about Sophie. The kid had never left the country, never flown internationally, never seen water clearer than Seabrook Harbor. Suddenly, the impossible seemed possible. Then I hung up and immediately drove to school. Rain hammered the windows relentlessly. Then Victoria laughed softly. "You know what's funny?" "What?" She leaned back against the couch. "I spent 6 months planning this vacation." My pulse tightened. 6 months? Every detail. Another pause. No meetings. Another pause. No calls. Another pause. No people. I couldn't help smiling. "Looks like that worked out." She laughed. "Exactly." Silence followed. Comfortable silence. Then she looked at me. "What about you? What about me? What did you plan?" The question made me smile immediately. "Honestly?" She nodded. "Honestly." I looked toward Sophie, then toward the dark windows. I just wanted her to have a memory. Victoria's expression softened. "A memory?" I nodded. "Something she'd remember when she's older." Another pause. "Something good." The room became very quiet. Then Victoria looked down, like she was thinking about something. Finally she whispered, "I think you're already giving her that." My chest tightened unexpectedly. Then neither of us spoke for a while. The storm continued raging outside. Somewhere, during the silence, the distance between us seemed to shrink. Not physically, something else. Something harder to explain. By morning, the worst of the storm had passed. Unfortunately, the news wasn't good. Resort management called every guest to provide an update. Transportation services had been suspended. Flights canceled. Ferries canceled. Internet unreliable. Most of the island was effectively isolated. Then the manager delivered the final piece of information. We estimate travel disruptions may continue for 5 to 7 days. Silence. Complete silence. Sophie looked delighted. Victoria looked horrified. I wasn't sure how I felt. Then Sophie raised both arms triumphantly. We're trapped together. The child announced it like she'd won the lottery. Victoria buried her face in her hands. Around noon, resort guests gathered in the main lounge for updates. That's when I witnessed something fascinating. The CEO returned. Not Victoria. The CEO. Employees rushed around nervously. Managers consulted reports. Problems appeared. And suddenly Victoria transformed. Calm. Efficient. Confident. Within 20 minutes she had helped organize supply distribution, guest communication plans, and emergency scheduling. People listened instantly when she spoke. The change was remarkable. Then I noticed something else. She wasn't trying to take control. She simply couldn't help solving problems. Later that afternoon, I mentioned it while we walked along a section of beach that had reopened. The storm clouds were finally clearing. Sunlight reflected off the water again. You can't turn it off, can you? I asked. Victoria looked confused. Turn what off? CEO mode. She laughed immediately, then sighed. Not really. Another pause. I've been doing it too long. The wind moved through her hair as we walked. Then she smiled slightly. What about you? My pulse tightened. What about me? Dad mode. Silence followed. Then I laughed. Same problem. Victoria smiled. Yeah. Another pause. I figured. For several moments, neither of us spoke. The beach stretched endlessly beside us. The ocean sparkled beneath the afternoon sun. Somewhere ahead, Sophie chased seagulls with absolutely no chance of catching them. Then Victoria slowed slightly. Can I ask you something? My pulse immediately accelerated. Sure. She looked toward the water. Not at me. Do you ever get tired? The question caught me off guard. Then I laughed softly. Constantly. No. She shook her head. I mean really tired. Another pause. The kind where nobody notices because you keep going anyway. Silence settled between us. Because suddenly I understood exactly what she meant. Then I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since we'd met, I realized how exhausted she seemed beneath everything else. The success, the confidence, the strength. Then I answered honestly. Yeah, Victoria smiled sadly. Me too. The moment lingered longer than either of us expected. Then Sophie came running back toward us. Emergency, she shouted. Both of us immediately turned. What happened? Sophie stopped in front of us, breathing hard. The resort is hosting a beach bonfire tonight. Silence followed. Then she grinned. And I already signed us up. Victoria laughed. I laughed. The child was impossible. But neither of us knew that the bonfire would become the night everything started changing. Because under the stars, beside the ocean, with the storm finally behind us, Victoria Knight was about to tell me the truth about why she really came to this island. Sophie climbed into my truck carrying 3 books, a backpack, and approximately 600 pounds of energy. Hi, Dad. Hi. You look weird. Children are terrifyingly observant. Then I smiled. I have news. Sophie's eyes widened immediately. Good news? Very. Another pause. Pack your swimsuit. Silence. Complete silence. Then she gasped so dramatically that several birds flew away from a nearby tree. 30 seconds later, she was standing on the truck seat. We won? Because under the stars, beside the ocean, with the storm finally behind us, Victoria Knight was about to tell me the truth about why she really came to this island. The bonfire started just after sunset. Resort staff built it directly on the beach. Guests gathered in small groups around the flames, while waves rolled gently onto the shore nearby. The storm felt like a distant memory now. The sky had cleared completely. Thousands of stars stretched overhead. Sophie immediately disappeared into a group of children roasting marshmallows, which left Victoria and me alone beside the fire. Neither of us seemed eager to point that out. Then Victoria accepted a cup of coffee from a server and stared into the flames. Quiet. Thoughtful. Different somehow. I noticed it immediately. "You okay?" She smiled without looking at me. "Maybe." That wasn't reassuring. Then silence settled between us. The fire crackled softly. Laughter drifted from nearby guests. Somewhere down the beach, a musician played an acoustic guitar. It felt like one of those moments people remember years later. Finally, Victoria spoke. "Do you know why I chose this island?" My pulse tightened. "Vacation?" She laughed softly. "Not exactly." Then she looked out toward the ocean. "I came here because nobody from work could reach me." Another pause. At least that was the plan. The wind moved through her hair. Then she sighed. 3 months ago, I announced that I was considering stepping down. My brain stopped. "Stepping down?" Victoria nodded. "Retiring." Silence. Complete silence. Then I stared at her. "You're 41. I know." Another pause. Apparently that upset a lot of people. I could imagine. Knight Global was one of the largest corporations in the country. The idea of Victoria walking away probably terrified investors. Then she smiled sadly. "The board thinks I'm having a breakdown. Are you?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. Victoria blinked, then laughed. A real laugh. "See?" Another pause. "That's why I like talking to you." My pulse immediately accelerated. Then she looked toward the ocean again. "No." Another pause. "I'm just tired." There it was. The word she'd used on the beach earlier. Tired. Not sleepy. Not overworked. Something deeper. Then Victoria continued. "I've spent 20 years building a company." Another pause. And somewhere along the way, her voice softened. "I forgot to build a life." The honesty hit harder than I expected. Then she looked toward the children playing near the fire, toward Sophie. "The strange thing?" Another pause. "I didn't realize what was missing until I met your daughter." My chest tightened immediately, because she sounded completely sincere. Then Victoria smiled softly. "She talks about the future like it's an adventure." Another pause. "Most adults talk about it like it's a business meeting." I laughed. "That's Sophie." "Yeah." Victoria smiled. "That's Sophie." Silence followed. Comfortable. Warm. Then she turned toward me. For a moment, neither of us looked away. The firelight reflected in her eyes. The ocean stretched endlessly behind her. And suddenly the rest of the beach seemed very far away. Then she asked quietly, "Can I tell you something embarrassing?" My pulse accelerated. "Sure." Victoria hesitated, which surprised me. Confident people don't usually hesitate. Then she laughed softly. "When we first got assigned to the same villa." Another pause. "I tried to pay the manager to move you." I burst out laughing immediately. "I knew it. I really did." She covered her face. "I'm not proud of it." "How much?" Victoria groaned. "Ethan, how much?" She pointed at me. "You're enjoying this." "Very much." Finally she sighed dramatically. $10,000. Silence exploded between us. Then I nearly dropped my coffee. 10,000? In my defense. Another pause. I really wanted privacy. I laughed so hard people started looking over. Then Victoria started laughing too. The sound carried across the beach. Free. Genuine. Completely different from the woman on magazine covers. Then Sophie appeared out of nowhere. Naturally. "What's funny?" Neither of us answered. That only made her more suspicious. Then she narrowed her eyes dramatically. "Are you flirting?" My soul immediately left my body. Victoria nearly choked on her coffee. Sophie nodded confidently. "You are." Then she smiled. "Good." Before either of us could recover, she ran away again, leaving destruction behind as usual. Victoria stared after her, then looked at me. "That child is dangerous. I've been saying that for years." The laughter eventually faded. The night grew quieter, more intimate, more honest. Then something unexpected happened. The musician near the water started playing slower songs. Apparently, she'd memorized the contest too. Then she threw her arms around my neck so hard I nearly drove into a mailbox. The next 2 weeks became a blur. Passports, packing lists, airport schedules. Sophie created 17 separate vacation plans. None of them were realistic. One involved dolphins, another involved treasure hunting, a third involved adopting a monkey. I vetoed the monkey immediately. Then finally departure day arrived. Sophie barely slept the night before, neither did I. Couples drifted toward the sand. Some danced. Some simply stood together watching the ocean. The atmosphere changed subtly. Then Victoria noticed it too. What? She pointed toward a couple dancing near the shoreline. This is becoming a romance movie. I laughed. A little. Another pause. Then neither of us spoke. Because suddenly we were both aware of something. The same thing. Then Victoria looked down at her coffee cup. You know, her voice sounded softer now. Before this trip, I couldn't remember the last time I sat still. My pulse tightened. Really? She nodded. Every minute scheduled. Another pause. Every day planned. Then she smiled slightly. Your daughter would hate it. She absolutely would. Victoria laughed. Then the smile faded. Not completely, just enough. Then she looked toward me. I'm glad the villa got double booked. Silence, complete silence. The words lingered between us. Then my heart forgot how to function. Because she wasn't joking. Not this time. Then before I could respond, Sophie came sprinting back toward us. Again, breathing hard, looking excited, which was never good. Emergency, she announced. Victoria immediately laughed. Another one? Sophie nodded. A big one. Then she pointed toward the stage near the bonfire. My stomach dropped instantly. What did you do? The child smiled proudly, which answered the question. Then she delivered the sentence that made both Victoria and me freeze. I signed you two up for the couples game. Silence exploded across the beach, because somewhere behind us, a resort employee had just picked up a microphone and announced the first names on the participation list. Victoria Knight and Ethan Parker. Victoria Knight and Ethan Parker. Silence exploded across the beach. Complete. Total. Catastrophic silence. Then I slowly turned toward Sophie. My daughter immediately took 3 steps backward. Before you get mad, Sophie, it was for charity. That was not helping. Then Victoria covered her face with both hands. Her shoulders started shaking. For one horrifying second, I thought she was crying. She wasn't. She was laughing. Completely laughing. This is happening, she managed to say. This is actually happening. The resort employee continued speaking into the microphone. Please, come to the stage. Around us, guests started clapping. Some cheered. Others turned to look. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Then Sophie smiled proudly. Good luck. I stared at her. You're grounded until college. Worth it. The terrifying thing was that she meant it. 5 minutes later, Victoria and I stood on a small wooden platform near the bonfire, while approximately 70 resort guests watched us. I wanted the ocean to swallow me. Victoria looked surprisingly calm. You seem relaxed. She smiled. I'm the CEO of a multinational corporation. Another pause. I once gave a speech to 10,000 investors. I pointed toward the crowd. And? Victoria looked toward the front row where Sophie was waving enthusiastically. Then she sighed. I'm more afraid of her. Fair, completely fair. Then the host smiled into the microphone. Welcome to Couples Challenge Night. The audience applauded. My soul left my body immediately. Then the host continued. Don't worry. Another pause. You don't actually need to be a couple. Victoria and I both relaxed. Slightly. Then the host added, you just need chemistry. My relaxation immediately vanished. The first game wasn't terrible. Simple questions. Favorite foods. Favorite movies. Random trivia. Then the second game arrived. And that's when things became dangerous. For this challenge, the host announced, partners must answer questions about each other. My pulse immediately accelerated, because Victoria and I had known each other for less than a week. Then the host looked at Victoria. What's Ethan's favorite food? Silence. Complete silence. Victoria stared at me. I stared at Victoria. Then she shrugged. Pizza? The audience applauded. The host looked impressed. Correct. My turn. What's Victoria's favorite drink? I didn't even hesitate. Coffee. Victoria blinked, then smiled slightly. Also correct. The games continued. Somehow we kept winning. Favorite movie? Biggest fear? Dream destination? The answers came easier than they should have. At some point, I realized something unsettling. I was paying attention to her. Really paying attention. Then came the final challenge. The host grinned mischievously, which should have worried everyone. Last question. At 5 in the morning, we boarded our first international flight. By noon, we landed in St. Aurelia. By 2 o'clock, we were driving along a coastline that looked too beautiful to be real. White sand beaches, crystal blue water, palm trees swaying in the wind. Sophie's face remained pressed against the car window for almost an hour. Dad? Yeah, rich people live like this? I laughed. Some of them. Another pause. That's rude. The resort appeared shortly afterward. The audience quieted. The ocean rolled softly behind us. The bonfire crackled nearby. Then the host pointed toward Victoria. What is something Ethan doesn't know about you? My pulse immediately tightened, because suddenly the game didn't feel like a game anymore. Victoria's smile faded slightly. Then she looked out toward the dark ocean. Silence followed, longer than expected. Then she answered softly. I almost got married. The audience became quiet, completely quiet. Then she continued. 3 months before the wedding. Another pause. I discovered he was secretly buying shares through another company. Another pause. He planned to take control of mine. My stomach dropped. Even though I'd heard pieces before, hearing it out loud felt different, more real. Then Victoria smiled sadly. The worst part? Another pause. I would have forgiven the business betrayal. Silence. It was the lying that broke me. The words lingered in the night air. Then the host looked uncomfortable. So did half the audience. Yet nobody interrupted. Finally, Victoria laughed softly. Well? Another pause. That got depressing. The audience laughed nervously. The moment passed, yet something remained. Later, after the games ended, Sophie proudly informed everyone that we had finished second place. Apparently that was excellent. Then she disappeared to collect free ice cream, leaving Victoria and me alone near the shoreline. The beach had mostly emptied. The bonfire burned lower now. The stars seemed brighter. Then Victoria sighed softly. Sorry. My pulse tightened. For what? The story. Another pause. I don't usually talk about it. I looked toward the ocean. You don't have to apologize. Silence followed. Then she smiled slightly. You know what the funny part is? What? Victoria laughed softly. For years, I thought I didn't trust people because of Daniel. Another pause. Turns out I was just lonely. The honesty in her voice hit harder than expected. Then she looked at me. Really looked at me. The kind of look people remember for a long time. Do you know why Sophie scares me? My pulse immediately accelerated. Why? Victoria smiled. Small. Vulnerable. Real. Because she acts like I belong here. Silence swallowed the beach. Then she looked toward the villa lights glowing in the distance. And part of me wants to believe her. My heart forgot how to function. Completely. Then neither of us spoke. The waves rolled across the sand. The night air felt warm. Somewhere behind us, music drifted from the resort. Then suddenly, the lights went out. Every light, every building, every pathway. The entire resort plunged into darkness. Guests gasped. Staff members shouted instructions. Emergency lighting failed to activate immediately. For several seconds, the island became completely black. Then Victoria's hand found mine. Instinctively. Automatically. Neither of us thought about it. We just stood there in the darkness holding on. Then the emergency generators finally activated. Soft golden lights flickered back to life across the resort. My pulse hammered. Victoria looked down, realizing what had happened, realizing her hand was still wrapped around mine. Silence followed. Neither of us moved. Then Sophie appeared out of nowhere carrying 2 ice creams and immediately froze. Her eyes widened to dangerous levels. OH. My soul left my body. Again. Then Sophie grinned so widely, it should have been illegal. Because for the first time since this vacation began, She had evidence. Because for the first time since this vacation began, she had evidence. Sophie stood frozen on the beach, holding 2 melting ice creams while staring directly at our joined hands. Then she slowly looked up at me, then at Victoria, then back at our hands. The grin spreading across her face should have been classified as a weapon. "Interesting," she said. My soul immediately left my body. Victoria pulled her hand away so quickly you'd think the electricity had come back through the sand. Unfortunately, the damage was already done. Sophie had seen everything. Worse, Sophie had interpreted everything. "Don't," I pointed at her. "Don't what? Whatever you're about to do." Sophie smiled innocently. I wasn't going to do anything. That was exactly how I knew she was absolutely going to do something. The next morning confirmed my worst fears. I walked into the villa kitchen and immediately stopped. Papers covered the dining table, charts, graphs, handwritten notes. Azure Cove looked less like a hotel and more like something stolen from a movie. Massive white buildings overlooking the ocean, private beaches, infinity pools, gardens, waterfalls. Everything screamed money. Then we entered the lobby. Sophie immediately grabbed my arm. "Act rich." I stared at her. "How?" "Walk slower." The terrifying thing was that she seemed completely serious. Then we approached the reception desk. A smiling employee greeted us. "Welcome to Azure Cove." Color-coded sections. My stomach dropped instantly. Sophie looked up from her work and smiled proudly. "Good morning." "No, you haven't even looked yet." "I don't need to." A few seconds later, Victoria entered carrying a cup of coffee. One glance at the table and she immediately sighed. "Oh no." Sophie looked offended. "Why does everyone keep saying that?" Then she proudly revealed the title written across the top page, "Vacation Success Report." I closed my eyes. Victoria nearly spilled her coffee laughing. Sophie flipped through the pages. "Current findings are very promising." Stop. "Preliminary analysis suggests strong compatibility." Stop. "Hand-holding incident indicates positive development." Victoria laughed so hard she had to sit down. Meanwhile, I seriously considered changing my identity. The child was impossible. Around noon, the weather finally improved. The sun returned, the ocean sparkled, resort activities reopened, guests celebrated. Sophie immediately disappeared, which should have worried me. It definitely worried me. An hour later, I discovered exactly why. I found Victoria standing beside the kayak rental station, holding a handwritten note. Her expression was somewhere between amusement and disbelief. "What's wrong?" I asked. She handed me the paper. "Dear Victoria, Dad wants to go kayaking, but he's too shy to ask. Love, Sophie." Silence followed. Complete silence. Then Victoria slowly looked at me. I slowly looked at Victoria. Neither of us spoke. Finally, she laughed. "Your daughter is a criminal mastermind." Agreed. Then a familiar voice appeared behind us. "I can hear you." Of course she could. 30 minutes later, despite neither of us volunteering, we were floating across crystal-clear Caribbean water in 2 kayaks connected side by side. The ocean stretched endlessly around us. The sky looked painted. For a while, neither of us spoke. The gentle rhythm of paddles breaking the water filled the silence. Then Victoria smiled. "You know what's weird?" "What?" She looked out toward the horizon. "I haven't checked my email in 3 days. I nearly dropped my paddle." 3 days? She nodded. "Personal record." Then she laughed softly. "My executives are probably organizing a search party." I smiled. The image wasn't hard to imagine. Then her expression softened. "The strange thing is," she paused, "I don't miss it." The honesty surprised me, not because she admitted it, because she sounded relieved. Then Victoria rested her paddle across the kayak. "For 20 years, my life has been scheduled down to the minute." Another pause. Meetings, flights, reports, interviews. She looked across the water. I forgot what it felt like to have a day that belonged to me. Silence settled between us. Comfortable, honest. Then I asked quietly, "What are you going to do?" Victoria smiled sadly. "About what?" After the vacation, her expression changed immediately. The answer clearly wasn't simple. Then she looked away. toward the endless blue horizon. I don't know. Another pause. That's what scares me. For several moments neither of us spoke. Eventually our kayaks drifted into a secluded cove hidden between cliffs. No guests, no noise, no resort staff, just sunlight dancing across the water. It felt like another world. Then Victoria sighed contentedly. I forgot life could feel like this. My pulse tightened. Like what? She smiled. Peaceful. The word lingered between us. Then she looked directly at me. The kind of look people remember long after the moment ends. For a second the world seemed very small. Just the water, the sunlight, the silence. Then her phone started ringing. Reality had terrible timing. Victoria groaned immediately and checked the screen. The caller ID appeared. Board chairman. Her smile vanished. Completely. The phone continued ringing. Once. Twice. 3 times. Finally she answered. Hello. Silence followed. Then her expression changed. The peace disappeared. The relaxation disappeared. The happiness disappeared. My stomach immediately tightened. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Then Victoria stood up so suddenly the kayak rocked beneath us. Victoria? She looked at me. For the first time since arriving on the island, she seemed genuinely shaken. Then she swallowed hard. The board voted. Silence followed. Voted on what? Another pause. Then she whispered the words that changed everything. They want me back in New York. The ocean suddenly felt colder. The sunlight seemed less bright. Because for the first time since this vacation began, there was a deadline. And suddenly our 7 days together were running out much faster than either of us wanted.